Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. Through our first bleed to our last, we come to know ourselves more deeply. This is a platform to reclaim the sacredness of all of it. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach, specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Hello, welcome to the show. Welcome back. I am coming to you today with one of my first solo episodes. Now, this is actually technically the third solo episode. The first one was last year, and it was all about the phases of your cycle, which has a lot to do with this topic too. So if you haven't listened to that one, then definitely go back and check that out. Probably almost a year ago now. And then the last solo episode was my story, which was released 2 weeks ago. And that continues to be and opened me up to a lot of expansion and freedom, which I shared about in last week's episode with Charlotte too. So I won't go too deeply into that now. But one thing that's been coming up for me, usually around mid-year, as we get into the tail end of summer, and especially in autumn, I do this, but I'm already starting now, is thinking, what do I want to pare down on? And what do I want to focus my intention and energy on? And what do I want more of? And how can I shift to make things even better and even more supportive for myself and for the women that I'm serving through this podcast and through my one-on-one work and retreats and all of that. And what I came to is I want to do 1 to 2 solo episodes a month for this podcast. So anything from more educational episodes to transmissions on what I've learned from my womb to my own experiences. And so this is the first of that series of my at least once a month. And these are going to be shorter. I'm thinking it's going to be about 30 minutes. We'll see by the time I finish recording this. But these are little tidbits for those of you who want some education and inspiration in addition to listening to the long form, incredible women's stories that are the heart and soul of this show. So thank you for being here. And if you have any ideas of what sorts of topics you'd like me to get into in these 30-minute solo episodes, you can comment on Spotify. You can leave comments on the show, or you can also DM me on Instagram. That's at moonbaby_magic. Yeah, and I think for these, what I want to really do is I want to invite us into presencing ourselves. I think it's a really beautiful practice to come into where you are in time and space, both in your body and in your external environment. So in your internal environment, what's happening, and in your external environment, can you create safety by feeling into where you actually are? And that is something that is a really big tenet of what I'm going to talk about today, which is what does it mean to live a womb-led life? So this is really an episode about trusting your female version of intuition. Yeah, so I'm Natalie, as you all know. I'm currently in Medellin, Colombia. Been here about a week. Going to be here a little less than another week. Going to be in Colombia for about 3 more weeks. I am on cycle day 19. I just confirmed ovulation yesterday, and I'm feeling this morning, I actually felt quite anxious. I woke up pretty anxious. I haven't been getting great sleep the past few days. And that's something that actually is really detrimental for me and most women. And I think we can often forget it. Like when I don't get good sleep, sometimes I'll wake up and I'll think, am I depressed? Is something wrong with me? And then I remember that I didn't get good sleep. And that's literally the only thing that's wrong. And it just shows how important it is to take care of like our baseline nourishment on that level of like sleep and food and grounding supportive practices. I just did this like whole series on Instagram about balancing like flowing with structure. And that's something I'm always learning. And I'm sure you're always learning too. But yeah, I prioritized a slow morning and have been very much enjoying my day since then. The ovulation energy I can tell is at its tail end, and I know I'll move into luteal soon. And so I'm getting myself out of the city this weekend and heading to a farm in the coffee region to stay on for a while so that I can be there for the luteal need for space and for my bleed. And so that feels really nourishing for me. So I do encourage you to check in with yourself in this moment, as I just did, with reminding yourself who you are, where you are, like where in the world are you? Maybe looking around your environment, taking it in, checking in with what day of your cycle you're on, remembering that day one is the first day that you bleed, not spotting, but bleeding. And then perhaps asking yourself how you feel on a physical, mental, and emotional level. One of my teachers, Nancy Lucina, calls that the internal weather reports. Yeah, so today we're getting into what does it mean to live a womb-led life? Sometimes when we talk about that, it can seem woo, right? What does that mean to listen to the womb? Does the womb actually speak? And part of it really is just about cyclical living. So leading a womb-led life to me is allowing my cycle to be the blueprint for how I live. And so I'm going to again do another plug for the episode I did last year, which is, I think it's called Your Inner Seasons Explained. And so it's all about the different phases that you move through in your cycle and what the sort of energy signature of each one is. And that's a really beautiful episode because that's my baseline. If I didn't have that, if I was just trying to connect to my womb without actually having the wisdom and the practical teachings of what is happening in my body on a physiological and energetic level, it would be harder to know what's important to focus on and when to have this connection with your womb, right? It's the same like developing a relationship with a person. Like you want to get to know them and spend time to them and ask them questions about their self and study them a little bit, right? And so you can think about that with developing this relationship with your womb and letting your womb lead you is you need to understand what's actually happening. So definitely recommend going back and listening to that episode called Your Inner Seasons Explained, because this is how you let your womb lead. It's about following your cycle. And this isn't just a blueprint that is this external thing we're placing upon ourselves as another rule book to live by. It's definitely not that, but it's about actually tuning into the energies that are alive within your body day to day, because it changes. And if you're trying to work against your body, you're going to block your intuition. Because as women, our intuition really does come from our womb. I wasn't planning on sharing this story, but last night I was at dinner with some new friends. And one of the women actually asked, there was one man in the group, and she asked him, "Do you like being a man?" It was such a direct and interesting and beautiful question. And so he answered, and then he asked all of us, like, do we like being women and why? And I, of course, was like obsessed with this topic. And so I shared like my favorite thing about being a woman is that like my blueprint for creation, my spiritual practice, my intuition, it's all built in within my body and my cycle. And I don't have to think about it too much because it is embodied. It's in me. And all I have to do is tune into what's already happening. And that's a really beautiful thing. That doesn't mean it's easy. It does require stepping back from our modern day-to-day culture, but it does flow. It's like maybe not necessarily easy, but it is easeful, if that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. Yeah. So I want to start before I get into sort of teaching on this episode with just a story. And this is a little more of a vulnerable one, but that has been something that I've been really stepping into and sharing is my vulnerability and my stories and being really honest with you all and sharing my experiences that hopefully you can learn from them. And it's so interesting that yesterday on Instagram, someone asked me a question and might ask me anything if I was in a partnership. And before, when I would get those questions, I actually get them a lot about like relationship. I would not answer them because I was really nervous to share that I got divorced. And I answered it yesterday and I got the most story views I've gotten in like months. And I feel like anytime I talk about relationship and breakups and divorce and personal things like this, like people want it. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's just we're all nosy and I do keep certain things to myself, but I think we're hungry for the vulnerability and I think we're hungry for connecting with other people on a real level. And yeah, I'm just here to share myself. And I appreciate you being here in good faith too. When I came to Colombia, I actually came here to meet a man that I met in Hawaii, who I spent like 3, 4 days with. And my last few weeks in Hawaii are my last week. And I was really hesitant to connect with this man. Not necessarily because he didn't feel safe, but just because I wasn't really in a place where I was I was just loving living my own life. And so, yeah, I met him and we had this really beautiful, I eventually opened up to it and softened into the connection. And we had this like very intimate, beautiful, fast, passionate 3 days together of getting to know each other. Yeah. And then on the last day that we spent together, I was leaving the next day to go to Peru, and he was leaving the next day to go home. He didn't live in Hawaii, he was visiting. And I remember him saying something to me like, what do we do now that we like each other and stuff? I was like, I guess we continue to get to know each other. And some background for me should be that I'm not like a very, historically, I've not been a very casual person. Of course, in my last story, you'll hear some of when I did do that, but my womb doesn't like casual connection. And so I've been in this place of trying to balance like going with the flow with things, but also holding my boundaries. And maybe some of you can relate to that. And I'd be really curious to know how you relate to that. Yeah. So essentially, the story goes that we parted ways. He promised to come see me. I said, what are we going to do? We're just going to be gone the next day. He was like, I'll come find you. And so I went to Peru. He told me he was going to come visit. Ultimately, we actually decided to meet in Colombia. And that was actually how I ended up here in Colombia to begin with, is I came here to meet this man. And we didn't plan much of it. We had planned we'd be there for 3 weeks, but we only booked 3 nights in Cartagena to begin with. And pretty immediately, it didn't feel the same to me once we got together. When I had spent time with him in Hawaii, I felt this level of his presence with me and connection to me and interest in me that was so unparalleled. And I will say, like, over the course of the 5, 6 weeks that I didn't see him before we met up again, I felt the shift. I felt the energetic shift of he's not really here with me anymore. But there's this part of me that I have been very vulnerably sharing that craves connection and gets carried away by love interest and crushes. And I was just so excited. It was so exciting to go meet this man in Colombia that I had this incredible couple days with in Hawaii. And so I was like, let's just see. We just need to be in person and see. And yeah, it was just what I thought. It didn't feel right. And it actually took me some time to really hear that and really honor that truth coming through. And I think probably a lot of you as women, or maybe even men, can relate to that feeling of you're not feeling honored in the way that you know you deserve to be, but you think they're just this, or I just need to work on this. And while I don't deny that, like, working on your attachment habits and turning the mirror to yourself is beautiful, like, there's also this point of knowing your worth and knowing your worth being honored. And yeah, I was sitting on a beach and we took a boat to an island in Cartagena. And I was sitting on a beach and I sat down and meditated and placed my hands on my womb. And actually, without realizing it, I became aware that he was also meditating next to me without opening my eyes, I guess I should say, not without realizing it. Yeah. And as I placed my hands on my womb, I can't even really describe what happened, but it was almost like a booming voice in my head, which is not always how the intuition of the womb sounds. But I think I was just really dropped into my body and asking her questions. And very clearly, the message came through, this is not your man. And in my mind, I'm like, but I'm here and we're on this trip together and I'm in Colombia and this is only the third day of the trip. And again, this is not your man. This is not your man. This is not your man. And my mind wanted to come up with all the reasons why I should try and figure it out and talk to him about it and try to make it work and get out of my head. But this wasn't my head. And actually, once I settled into this is not my man, this wave of like immense calm came over me. And I actually then opened my eyes. I saw him meditating peacefully too. I walked into the ocean and went for a swim on my own and just felt my deep well of inner peace, which, if you've been with me for some time, that is something that is the most impactful thing I've cultivated in the last couple of years of my healing journey. more than anything else, the deep sense of inner peace. And so I knew that was the right thing. And I think this is where living a womb-led life and listening to the voice of your womb intersects and meets the nervous system safety that is part of like choosing a healthy relationship and choosing a healthy connection and stepping away from the pattern of anxious attachment, in my case, of, oh, but I need to be chosen. I need to try it. And the anxiety of someone's not giving you what you need. And instead of stepping away and giving it to yourself and honoring yourself, leaning further in and trying to get what you need from the person who isn't giving it to you. And that has been a big pattern in my relationships. And that was a really big deal for me to make that decision. And something that I've been saying a lot is like heart first, logistics later. You could also say womb first, logistics later. And so there were a lot of logistics to figure out, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to the US now that I'm not going to travel with this man? Or do I keep traveling with him, but just as friends? Do I stay in Colombia and do something else? Do I go back to Peru, to Laura's house where I was at before? What do I do? And suddenly it's all the options opened up to me. And my initial instinct was a fear instinct of just like panic. But I took some time. I went to bed. I waited until I felt safe in my body. I had the conversation with this man too, and he actually had felt the same way, which had been clear to me. And so we had decided to part ways. And then the next morning, after my initial bit of fear had passed, I knew that I needed some time to be somewhere where I could relax and rejuvenate and figure out what's next for me, and not make a rush decision based on logistics, but make a truly embodied decision from my heart and from my highest self and highest potential. And yeah, I decided I needed to go somewhere else in Colombia, somewhere more relaxed, out of the city. I decided to go to the beach. And the next day at the cafe, the day that I needed to leave, I was sitting getting some work done, still having no idea where I was going to go that same day. And I met a woman who was traveling to a beach town and decided to take the bus. And we actually didn't end up taking the same bus. And I actually never saw her again. But I think it's almost spirit gives you the little nudges you need. And since that moment, I have been on the most beautiful and magical and unexpected journey in Colombia by myself. I've been here much longer than I anticipated to be. I'm already over a week longer than I had planned to stay when I was traveling with this man. I've met amazing and wonderful women. I have been just totally, I've totally fallen in love with Colombia and its people and its culture and its nature and its cities, the vibrancy here, with no real plans actually to leave anytime soon. And yeah, it came from this deep trust. The logistics came later. Like, of course, I had to figure out where to go and how to get there and what I was going to do. But that was a big moment for me, trusting the voice of my womb and choosing to listen, even when it didn't necessarily make sense to me. Yeah. And so I wanted to start with that story because I think it really illustrates what does it mean to live a womb-led life. And it's not always this obvious. You do need to learn the language of your body. And so one thing I'll encourage you all to do, like maybe we just do it now, is place a hand on your womb. And to start out, perhaps just asking your womb something that you already know, like pulling up something that feels really obvious to you. I don't know, what's coming up for me now is like how much I love my dog, Rosie. And when I think about how much I love my dog, Rosie, and that I want to cuddle her and pet her as soon as possible, that feels like a warmth, a softening, a releasing in my womb, like a releasing of my pelvic floor, like a dropping in. It brings a wave of calm over my body to think about Rosie. And so maybe thinking about something like that for you, like what does that feel like in your womb? Yeah, and that is how you can start to get really comfortable with your womb's yes. Noticing what sensations arise when something is true for you. And over time, noticing like those moments when your body tenses up or when there's a clear no. I had a clear no the other day. Like I went for a night out, and actually the night out was really fun. But one of the first places we tried to go to, this club, like we were standing outside of it and everything in my body was just like, No. And I almost said yes to going into the club, but then someone directly asked me, like, what do you think? Like, how do you feel about this? And I was like, I don't want to be there. And it's like the more that you do this, the more, yeah, the more it gets easier. And I was going to talk about this at the end, but I guess since I'm saying it now, like intuition is truly a muscle. I've realized that so much more lately is the more times you listen to it and heed it and do it, the louder it gets, the more your body keeps speaking to you. And I've always had this relationship with my womb, but I've sometimes tried to like subtly bring in my mind to bring logical sense to things. And I'm not saying don't use logic. I'm just saying the logic comes later because not everything has to make logical sense right away. But yes, the more you practice, the louder it gets. And since that experience on the beach at the island in Cartagena with the "this is not your man" and me heeding that advice and choosing to take a path that was uncharted and scary, it's very clear to me when something is a yes and a no since then. And the more I trust it, the more it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. So don't feel however you want to feel. But see if you can find some compassion for yourself if you don't notice those yeses and nos right away. Because if you have a lifetime, and most of us do, of suppressing that instinctual urge, that voice of your womb, it's going to be harder to hear. It's going to be a bit muffled. And so taking some time to really drop in every once in a while and ask a question and truly listen for the answer. Feel into your body. Notice the sensation that arises. One thing I really do want to get into here also is I find with your intuition that it's strongest in the luteal phase and during menstruation. And so sometimes when I'm in my follicular phase and around ovulation, I don't notice that like really dropped in intuitive self as much. Of course, it's still there. Of course, you can always place a hand on your womb and listen. But I also want to say, don't worry if you don't notice it as much in the first half of your cycle, because the first half of the cycle is really the time that we're in like our doing, we're creating, we're like very much in the external world. And then I find that moving into the luteal phase, we drop into this internal space and we have more access to our intuition and those subtler messages. And so that would be a really beautiful time to practice is the days leading up to your bleed and your bleed. And so I'll get into these two phases a little more in detail in regards specifically to intuition. So your luteal phase is the time after you ovulate until you bleed. And this is often when a lot of women experience things like PMS. And I won't go into a lot of physical PMS symptoms, but often the more psychological and mental, emotional PMS symptoms are like rage and grief and overthinking and angst. And I find that usually means that we need more time and space to ourselves. Though, of course, I also work with women on diet changes for that too. And that's a huge part of it. But that overwhelm feeling often means we need time to process what's happened from the last few weeks of our cycle. It's time to slow down. It's time to take more time to yourself. It's time to enter into more of your internal space. And what can often happen in the luteal phase is we notice the archetype of our inner critic. So if you've been here some time, or maybe if you're new, I work a lot with archetypes. And the wider archetype for the luteal phase is the sorceress or the wild woman. But within that, there is this energy of the inner critic. And most of us are taught to really push down the inner critic. And that's a part of us that we just need to ignore. Now, of course, if you have a voice in your head constantly telling you that you're a terrible person, I don't want you to indulge that voice all the time. And especially in the first half of your cycle, when you're like so fresh and young and new in this new phase of your cycle, like you can tell that inner critic voice, not now. But the trick is you do have to let her come back in the luteal phase once you've been more seasoned by your cycle. If you listen to my solo episode from 2 weeks ago, I shared about how the voice of my inner critic is actually how I ended up leaving my home and leaving my husband, or separating from my husband. I guess that was a choice we made together from a place of deep integrity. And yeah, and I just took a moment to breathe deeply as I share about these more vulnerable parts, because sometimes it does still hold a charge, and that's totally okay. Yeah, I'm just being in my body for a moment. Yeah, that inner critic energy was really strong for me. And I think she often is really strong when she has a message for you. And sometimes the message sounds like you're a terrible person, but that's not actually the message. And I find that when you can dig a little deeper, when you have that time and space to really reflect on the state of your life, what choices you've made, what commitments you've made, and if those actually feel in alignment with what you truly desire for your life, you can tell that the inner critic is actually sharing with you what you don't want. Like, what is not working? What's making you angry? What feels too much? And how can you shift that just a little bit to make sure that, as Nancy, my teacher, says, your arrow is still pointed in the right direction? I know that doesn't mean like changing your entire life every luteal phase. Sometimes it might be changing a lot in your life, but often it's tuning into when your inner critic says, my life sucks, I need to change all of it. What piece is frustrating you? What jealousy is coming up that you see that's something you want that you could begin to cultivate for yourself? What are you doing that you feel so resentful for that you could ask for help with? And that's the voice of your womb. That's listening to that intuition. And I will say here, it is important to distinguish intuition from fear. And I think the best way to think about that is, does the message coming through feel like angst and a lot of overthinking? Does it create a chaos in your brain? Or does it feel really clear? Does it bring peace to your body? Or does it overwhelm you? And doing that from a nervous system state, because making a big life decision can feel like really nerve-wracking. But I will share, for me, like when I knew that it was time to end my relationship, I was really sad and there was a lot of grief, but it didn't make me anxious. What actually made me anxious was not doing it when I really tuned in. And so I encourage you, it's not always as big of a decision like that. Maybe it's a certain household task. Maybe it's that simple. But tuning in, what do you need? What is coming up that isn't in alignment in your life? And then when you get to menstruation, you get to meet your inner wise woman, this old crone, this archetype that we could call the oracle. And when you're menstruating, it is really important to rest. If you haven't heard me say that before, welcome. You need to rest when you're bleeding, on not only a physical level, but on an emotional, mental, psychological, and spiritual level too. You need a break because your inner wise woman needs time and space to rest and to receive vision. And so there are these chambers of menstruation that I learned about from the book Wild Power by Alexandra Pope and Shawnee Wurtzlicker. They're from the Red School. They're a British organization. And the chambers of menstruation go like this. When you rest, when you take space during your bleed, whatever that might mean for you in this season of life. And if you need some help on how to do that, I have a guide. It's called Your Period Prep Guide, and it leads you through all the practical steps, both practical and energetic, as well as journaling prompts, diet stuff, and rituals to do to really honor this time. And so you can find the link to that in the show notes. I also work with women one-on-one with this. I actually have a new woman just coming into my practice who, often I work with women on these more holistic health things in my practice, but I have a woman who really just wants to work one-on-one for cyclical living and figuring out how she can really set herself up well for a restful bleed, which is so beautiful. And I just absolutely love that she's prioritizing that in her life. So that's also available to you. But the chambers of menstruation appear to you if you actually choose to rest. And so the first chamber, and again, this is from Wild Power, wonderful book. The first one is separation. And so it's that separating yourself from day-to-day life. Eventually, once you do that, you move into the chamber of surrender, which is, I am in a different state. I'm not going to do my normal day-to-day tasks. I am going to surrender to what this experience is asking of me. And sometimes we're initiated into surrender through pain, cramps. And that's some of our path. That was certainly mine until I healed it. And if you can surrender, then eventually you move into the chamber of renewal. And renewal in Wild Power, they call like the hug from the Great Mother herself, which is this beautiful space you enter into when you feel rejuvenated during your bleed. And from that space of the rejuvenation, only from that space, you enter the chamber of vision and the chamber of clarity. And that's like your deepest intuition. I was saying the other day to someone that it's like your own personal medicine journey once per month. And yeah, that happens when you rest. And so this is your time to really receive the seeds that you want to plant for your next cycle, and the time to really connect deeply with the intuition of your womb and receive guidance. And it's often quite subtle, but the more you practice this art of menstrual rest, the more you're going to receive it. Yeah, so I think that's what I'll share for today. In closing, I want to just invite you to ask your womb questions. Feel for the bodily sensations and the inner knowings that might not make logical sense when you ask these questions. Can you build trust with your body by heeding everything that she asks? Because again, intuition is truly a muscle. And the more you practice, the louder it gets. Thank you so much for being here, women. Until next week. Thank you for tuning into the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly such an honor to bring these stories forward to you, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it could reach more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to join our online community, the Cyclical Living Circle, in the show notes below. There you'll also find the links to book one-on-one virtual sessions, shop the herbal shop, and any group programs that I'm currently offering. Plus, you can follow me on Instagram, and I love to connect with you all there. All right, see you next week.